rod was above the yellow rod, like so, that would be more shallow. And if it was inside that, that would be more steep or more vertical. And to be exact in terminology, this would be above plane, this would be below plane, this would be kind of on. So today we're looking at whether you need to shallow the club. I know I post quite a few videos on how to shallow the club, and I think it's really important, but it is certainly not the only way. Today we're going to discuss whether you need to shallow the club and the benefits to not shallowing the club and to shallowing the club. So whether you should be in one camp or the other, or whether you should stick to what you do and just understand it to understand why you hit the shot you do, and maybe then make some compensations or adjustments to make you play better golf. Keep watching to learn how. So it's definitely the trend to shallow the shaft in that transition area. There are loads of benefits for it for me. You gain more speed, you're able to hit draw shots and straight shots without any compensation. The steeper guys, the guys that have the shaft more vertical, not vertical, but more vertical, there are compensations you would have to make through impact to hit a straight shot. Otherwise, you're going to be playing with fades and slices forever. So those are the kind of choices. Let's get stuck into the detail. So steep or shallow, and a lot of people might be looking at the video and looking at the title and thinking they don't really understand what the difference is. What we're looking at is really the shaft position in transition as we start down. To help explain, I'm going to use a rod. I'm going to stick the rod alongside the shaft, and I'm going to use the yellow rod there to represent my ball to target line. So if I go to the top of my backswing and then make a downswing, and my rod is pointing to the yellow rod, that would be what I class as a fairly neutral pitch of the shaft on the way down. If that rod was above the yellow rod, like so, that would be more shallow. And if it was inside that, that would be more steep or more vertical. And to be exact in terminology, this would be above plane, this would be below plane, this would be kind of on plane as we describe it, or on the rotary arc. Now, what we see from most elite players is the shaft pitch will be on or slightly above as we get down to this position here. And this shaft will bisect kind of the middle of your bicep. What I see on my lesson tee from 90% of golfers that would be above 5 handicap digit and above, their shaft plane would be more vertical and pointing down just inside that yellow line. And what has to happen from there to make a straight shot? They have to then early extend, slow the body down, arch their wrists more to get that club then on the correct arc or plane, pre-impact and during impact. So there's a slowing down of the body, there's a lack of rotation of the body, and it's a fault that fixes a fault, so two wrongs making a right. And there is certainly nothing wrong with that if it's consistent and it gives you the outcome you desire. So you don't have to shallow the club. The other option is, if you start down with a more vertical plane and you turn through the golf ball, you will then cut across the ball, causing you to hit pull shots, fade shots and slice shots. So if you want to be a fader, there's certainly nothing wrong with it, but you will definitely have to manage what you do, because if you're cutting across the golf ball a long way, there's a chance that the strike will be a little bit inconsistent. Just as if you're hitting from the inside too much, the strike can be inconsistent. But if you're cutting across the golf ball, you tend to have what we call an oblique strike. So you tend to have a kind of glancing blow. This can affect power a little bit. Now, if the amount you're cutting across the golf ball is inside 1 or 2 degrees, then it's going to make very little difference to the power from hitting it 1 or 2 degrees from the inside. I would argue that probably the inside out path or the shallowing will probably get you a couple of extra yards, but it's not big enough to be a huge concern. Now, if you're cutting across the golf ball a long way and you change that to being more neutral or more an inside path, then it's going to make a bigger difference for sure. So in answer to the question, do you need to shallow the club? No. But what I would suggest is if you don't shallow the club, you're better off being a fader, because then you're going to turn onto the golf ball. Now, turning onto the golf ball, what that's going to allow you to do is control your low point better. So if I turn onto the golf ball, I'm going to present my club after the ball at its lowest point, so about here, which is where we'd want it with any good shot. That is going to make me cut across the ball, as we already said, but my strike in terms of low point will be fine. And if I'm only cutting across the golf ball, as I've already said, a couple of degrees, then it's not going to really make any difference to the point of view of power. And if we're fading the ball a few yards or drawing the ball a few yards, I'm happy with either. As a golf coach and a golf player, I'd be happy with either ball flight. To a degree, I'd be quite happy fading my short irons and drawing everything else. That would be kind of the perfect world. But I certainly don't want two swings. I definitely don't want to be standing there and think, oh, this is my short iron swing, this is my long iron swing. So I can manipulate my setup to do that if that is my wishes and is my desires to do that with my shots, rather than trying to have two different golf swings. I wouldn't recommend that. The whole point of this video is, obviously there's loads and loads of talk out there on social media about you need to shallow the club, how to shallow the club. And I agree with that, because 99% of the best golfers in the world are shallow in the club, so why not try and do something similar? It also means if we shallow the club correctly, we can rotate onto the golf ball and still have what we would class as a neutral swing path to hit straight shots or a draw shot. And 99% of the golfers I meet in my studio want to hit the ball either straight or a draw. That 1% want to hit cut shots. And there's nothing wrong with if you want to hit cut shots or draw shots. Again, own what you want to do and make sure you're set up and designed to achieve that in terms of how you move. So really, this is really just a discussion about shallow or steep. And you can also get different varieties within that. So if I go here and go shallow and still point to that yellow stick, that is a flatter version than this. And what you'll find is the flatter the version, the more the body has to turn to square the club up, and the more we take our hands out of play. The more we have to stall our body a little bit through the ball, the more then we're going to use our hands through the impact to kind of catch up and square the club face up. The ideal scenario for me, for the best players in the world, we want to have a fairly shallow pitch here. Then we want to turn onto the golf ball, and we want to keep the hands fairly passive and use our body through the ball and have quite a shallow exit as well. So it's like a very kind of mirrored circle. That would be the ideal work for me. But as we've said all along, if we have a steeper plane and hit great shots, there's no need to change it. I would recommend using sticks like this just to understand where you are, and also to change your plane if you wanted to. So if you wanted to make your plane shallower, we could certainly do a lot of rehearsals like this, keeping it above the yellow rod on the ground. If we wanted to make the plane steeper, we could certainly feel we get more vertical here and get the stick to point inside the yellow stick on the ground. And I will do that quite often with a lot of good players that get too shallow in transition, get too shallow into the golf ball. Freddie Couples is one of these kind of guys that used to do this years ago. He used to practice with club boxes stacked on top of each other to stop his delivery position getting too much into out. Freddie crosses the line at the top. He has a big shoulder turn, or certainly used to have a big shoulder turn, and then because of that, he allows himself to shallow it on the way down. But he kind of over shallows it a little bit as he gets lower into that pre-impact position. So he's always tried to manage that. And that's a good word. Managing your plane path impact is important, but also understanding why it happens, the cause. So any swing is fine, any plane, any path is fine. So read your ball flight, analyze your swing, put it on video if you need to. Own what you do. But you don't have to shallow the club if you don't want to. There is more than one way. And there's always outliners of really successful golfers that will do things differently. So there you have it. You do not need to shallow the club if you don't want to. Understand your ball flight, understand your positions, understand your patterns and how your compensations are going to be. You're really going to be a steep transitioner and an early extender or an archer of your wrist to get the club shallow, or you're going to turn onto the ball and hit more fades and cuts and slices. You know, if you're hitting a little fade, as we said already, great. The ball's finishing on target and it's a solid shot. So nothing wrong with that at all. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please click like and share the video. I'm sure there's other golfers out in the world will appreciate from the learning and the sharing of this knowledge. So if you can do that, I'd be really appreciative. If you haven't already followed me or subscribed, hit my logo down this bottom corner. Join me in my journey and let me help you improve your golf. Also, please post questions and comments down below in the community. I really want to hear from you what kind of videos you want to see and what kind of content you want to see. And also feedback is also really useful. Thanks for joining me today at the Forest of Arden. Have a great holiday. See you soon.